When we first meet Varys in a Game of Thrones, he's already established. He sits on the small council. He moves quietly through the Red Keep. He knows things before other men do. What the story never shows directly is how he got there. He is a foreigner from Lys, a eunuch. No lands, no banner, no knights. So how does someone like that secure one of the most powerful offices in Westeros? To answer that, we have to start long before King's Landing and long before Robert's Rebellion. Hello everyone, and welcome to Storyteller's Codex. Here we delve deep into the rich lore of the Lord of the Rings, a song of ice and fire, and the vast worlds beyond. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. The only real window we get into Varys' early life comes in A Clash of Kings, when he speaks to Tyrion, and it's worth slowing down there, because that conversation isn't just background detail. It explains his entire operating system. He says he was born in Lys and sold to a mummer's troop. Now that might sound incidental, but it isn't. A mummer learns how to watch people. He learns how to copy them. He learns timing, when to speak, when to stay quiet, how to become whatever the audience expects. That's not a small thing, that's training. Then he describes the sorcerer. He says he was drugged, mutilated, and burned for a ritual, and he tells Tyrion this. The flames turned blue, and I heard a voice answer him, though I did not understand the words they spoke. After that, he was thrown away, and that's the part that matters most, because once you remove family, protection, and status, survival depends on something else. Varys explains that he learned very quickly that secrets could be traded. If he overheard something useful, something embarrassing, something dangerous, it had value. So before he ever set foot in Westeros, he understood something many lords never quite grasp. Power often shifts quietly, long before armies move. And if you're the one who hears those quiet shifts first, you don't need a banner, you need leverage. At some point, Varys leaves the streets behind and ends up in Pentos. That's where Illyrio Mopatis enters the picture, and this is where things start to scale up. Illyrio tells Tyrion in A Dance with Dragons that he and Varys made a profitable partnership in their early years. Varys had a gift for uncovering information that others missed. Private arrangements, hidden debts, tensions between magisters. Now think about what that actually means in practice. If you're a merchant prince and you discover that your rival is quietly insolvent, that changes how you negotiate. If you learn that a marriage alliance is built on a lie that shifts power before anyone draws a sword. Varys isn't just collecting gossip at this stage, he's learning how information changes outcomes. This is also likely where the model of the little birds develops into something systematic. Children, servants, and apprentices move through wealthy households almost invisibly. They're present during arguments. They carry trays. They clean rooms. They're not seen as political actors, but they hear everything. By the time Varys' reputation begins circulating beyond Pentos, he isn't simply a clever spy. He's someone known for building networks, and more importantly for managing them. And reputation matters. Because eventually, that reputation reaches a king who is beginning to doubt everyone around him. To understand how Varys enters Westeros, you have to look closely at the defiance of Duskendale. Aerys II is taken captive by Lord Denys Darklyn and held for months. Barristan Selmy later reflects in A Dance with Dragons that the king who returned from captivity was altered. He became suspicious. He withdrew from former allies. He no longer trusted Tywin Lannister the way he once had. That change in psychology is critical. Before Duskendale, Aerys still relied heavily on established noble structures. After Duskendale, he increasingly looked for threats inside those structures, and that's where a foreign spy master becomes useful. A Westerosi lord brings with him family, bannermen, loyalties, obligations. A man from Lys does not. We know from Jaime Lannister's recollections that Varys was already advising Aerys during the final days before the sack of King's Landing. Jaime remembers that when Tywin arrived outside the gates, Varys urged caution. Pycelle argued that Tywin should be admitted. Aerys listened to Pycelle. Now that detail tells us something subtle but important. Varys was already close enough to the king to participate in decisions that would determine the fate of the capital. He wasn't on the margins of court politics, he was inside the room. And that suggests his appointment as Master of Whisperers didn't happen casually. It happened because Aerys, increasingly isolated and distrustful of his great lords, wanted someone whose loyalty wasn't tied to Westerosi bloodlines. In that environment, Varys wasn't an anomaly. He was an answer to a specific problem. By the time Tywin Lannister marches on King's Landing, Varys is already Master of Whisperers. We know he's present in the final days of Aerys' rule because Jaime remembers him. In A Storm of Swords, Jaime recalls that Varys warned against opening the gates when Tywin's army arrived. Pycelle argued the opposite. Aerys trusted Pycelle. That moment is revealing. It shows that Varys was not some distant observer. He was advising the king during the most fragile hour of the dynasty. Then the gates open. Tywin's men enter the city. The sack begins. Elia Martell and her children are murdered. Jaime kills Aerys to prevent the wildfire caches from destroying the capital. In all of that chaos, Varys disappears. We don't get a scene of him fleeing, we don't get a confrontation. He simply isn't there when the dust settles, and that's important. Because when Robert Baratheon takes the throne, Varys is still Master of Whisperers. Think about that for a moment. He served Aerys closely enough to advise him on existential decisions. He was embedded in a regime that Robert had just overthrown, and yet he survives the transition. That doesn't happen accidentally. It suggests that by the time the dynasty fell, Varys' role had become institutional rather than personal. Removing him would not simply mean punishing a Targaryen loyalist. It would mean dismantling the entire intelligence apparatus of the capital during a regime change. And in a fragile political climate, that's a risk few rulers want to take. Robert Baratheon is not a king who concerns himself deeply with administration. That role largely falls to Jon Arryn. So if Varys remains on the small council, it's likely because someone like Jon Arryn sees the practical value of keeping him there. The realm has just come through civil war. Targaryen loyalists still exist. Across the narrow sea, Viserys and Daenerys survive. There are exiled lords and uncertain allegiances. An intelligence network matters. When we see Varys in A Game of Thrones, he reports on Daenerys' marriage to Khal Drogo. He provides information about Essos. He presents himself as a servant of stability rather than of any one dynasty. And that positioning is careful. He doesn't behave like a displaced loyalist. He doesn't show open attachment to the fallen regime. Instead, he makes himself useful to the new one. What's interesting is that Robert doesn't appear particularly invested in Varys one way or the other. There's no strong personal bond. Varys simply remains part of the machinery, and that suggests something subtle about his rise. By this point, he's no longer merely Aerys' spy master. He is the capital's spy master. That distinction matters. Because once an office becomes associated with stability rather than a specific king, it becomes harder to justify removing the man who runs it. And that's where Varys begins to look less like a court curiosity and more like a fixture. One of the earliest signs that Varys is thinking beyond Robert's reign comes in A Game of Thrones, in Arya's chapter Beneath the Red Keep. She's chasing cats through the tunnels and overhears a conversation between two men. One is Varys, the other is Illyrio. What's striking about that scene is how calm the discussion is. They're not panicking, they're not reacting to events, they're discussing timing. Illyrio says at one point, "If one hand can die, why not a second?" They're talking about Ned Stark, they're talking about war, but they're not talking about preventing it, they're talking about managing it. There's also a reference to the Dothraki and to allowing things to ripen. The language suggests patience. They are waiting for conditions to mature. That's the important part. Varys is sitting on Robert's small council at this time. He's officially serving the Baratheon regime, and yet he is in secret communication with Illyrio, discussing a political future that does not centre on Robert. This isn't opportunism in the moment, it's long-term positioning. The Arya scene tells us that Varys' loyalty is not attached to the sitting king. It's attached to an outcome that has not yet arrived. At this stage in the story, we don't know what that outcome is, but years later we find out. The epilogue of A Dance with Dragons is the first time Varys drops the mask completely. Kevan Lannister has begun restoring order. He has dismissed Cersei's excesses, he is reconciling with the Tyrells, he is stabilising the court, and then Varys kills him. He shoots him with a crossbow in his chambers. Afterward, he speaks plainly. He explains that Kevan's competence is a problem. The realm needs to appear unstable, factional, weak. He says, "Your death will not be in vain, my lord. I am sorry." And then he explains the larger design. A boy has been raised across the narrow sea. educated, trained, prepared, a boy who has been shaped carefully for rule. Illyrio later confirms to Tyrion that this boy is Aegon Targaryen, supposedly the son of Rhaegar, rescued during the sack of King's Landing. What matters here isn't simply whether Aegon is genuine. What matters is the timeline. If Aegon has been raised in secret, educated in languages, history and leadership that requires years of preparation, which means Varys has been serving Aerys, then Robert, then the Lannister regime, all while coordinating with Illyrio to prepare an alternative. The Arya scene hinted at it, the epilogue confirms it, and it reframes everything that came before. Because now Varys doesn't look like a man who simply survived regime change. He looks like a man who positioned himself inside each regime while waiting for the moment to replace it. If you look at Varys across all these regimes, Aerys, Robert, the Lannisters, one thing becomes clear. He doesn't accumulate visible power, he doesn't take lands when offered, he doesn't marry into houses, he doesn't attach himself publicly to any faction. Even Peter Baelish, who begins in a similar administrative position, eventually takes Harrenhal, takes the Vale, builds visible authority. Varys doesn't, and that's deliberate. Because the moment you hold land in Westeros, you become legible, you become measurable. Other lords can weigh your strength against theirs. Varys never allows that. Instead, he embeds himself in the machinery of governance. His influence depends on access, to corridors, to whispers, to information moving quietly before it reaches the council chamber. And that kind of influence survives upheaval more easily than banners do. When Aerys dies, his Kingsguard fall or scatter. His loyal lords are executed or displaced. But the intelligence network inside King's Landing still exists, and that network makes itself useful to whoever sits the throne. So by the time Robert inherits the crown, Varys is less Aerys' spymaster and more the capital's spymaster. That shift from personal loyalty to institutional necessity is what protects him, and it also gives him time to listen, time to assess weaknesses, time to wait for the right moment. When Varys kills Kevan Lannister, he finally explains what he's been working toward. He says that the realm must remain divided, that conflict creates opportunity, that a young claimant raised carefully will be more readily accepted in a fractured kingdom. Whether Aegon is truly Rhaegar's son is almost secondary in that moment. What matters is that Varys has spent decades inside the heart of Westerosi politics while preparing something outside of it. He learned in Lys that survival depends on knowing what others don't. He learned in Pentos that information can shape outcomes long before battles begin. He learned under Aerys that rulers crave reassurance and fear betrayal. And under Robert, he learned that institutions outlast kings. By the time Aegon lands in the Stormlands, Varys is not improvising. He has been watching. And that might be the most important point. Varys didn't become Master of Whisperers by force or by lineage. He became indispensable by understanding the fears of unstable rulers, and by making sure he was the one person who always seemed able to answer them. If you're interested in The Lord of the Rings or A Song of Ice and Fire, click one of the links on the screen to dive deeper into the lore. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.